In 1565, a storm uprooted a large tree on the fell of Seathwaite in Borrowdale, Cumberland, a remote valley in the northwest of England, so isolated that the locals had no immediate framework for understanding what they found tangled in the roots beneath it. A dense, black, unusually heavy mineral deposit. They tried to burn it, it would not burn. They tried to smelt it, it produced nothing useful. They tried using it as a dye for wool, it worked, imperfectly, and stained everything it touched a deep, permanent black. Eventually, and nobody recorded exactly when or how this transition happened, someone picked up a lump of it, held it against a piece of paper, and drew a line. The line was darker, smoother, and more precise than anything produced by the ink and quill technology of the era. It could be erased, partially, with a damp cloth. It did not require preparation, did not require an inkwell, did not require the elaborate ritual of cutting and recutting a quill that every professional writer in England spent several minutes performing before they could write a single word. It was, in the most practical sense, a revolution in the technology of written communication. Within 20 years of that discovery, the British government had declared the Borrowdale deposit a royal asset, placed it under armed guard, and made the unauthorized removal of the mineral from the valley a criminal offense, punishable by hard labor. The pencil was not illegal because it was dangerous in the obvious sense. It was not a weapon, it was not a poison. It was illegal because what it could do, in the wrong hands, at scale, without control, was something that governments in the 16th century understood, with perfect instinctive clarity, to be more dangerous than either. It could put the power of precise, portable, erasable written communication into the hands of anyone. And that, in 1565, was a genuinely revolutionary threat. To understand why a writing instrument required armed guards, you have to understand what writing meant in the 16th century. And what writing meant, who controlled it, who could access it, what it cost to produce, was almost everything. The dominant writing technology of the medieval and early modern world was ink on parchment or paper, applied with a quill pen. This technology had three properties that, taken together, ensured that written communication remained the exclusive province of the educated, the wealthy, and the institutionally powerful. It was expensive. Parchment, prepared animal skin, cost more than most people earned in a week for a single sheet of sufficient quality for professional use. Paper was cheaper, but still not trivial. Ink required preparation. Quills required skill to cut and maintain. It was slow. A professional scribe could produce perhaps 2,000 words in a working day under ideal conditions. Legal documents, official correspondence, and commercial records required trained specialists whose services were not available to most of the population. And it was permanent. Ink on parchment could not be meaningfully corrected without visible evidence of the correction. Every document was a commitment. Every error was a public record of the error. These three properties, expense, slowness, permanence, were not merely inconvenient features of the available technology. They were the structural foundations of a system of informational control that the church, the crown, and the commercial establishment had built their authority on. Control the writing. Control the record. Control the record and you control what is true, what is legal, what is owed, and what is permitted. The printing press had already begun dismantling part of this system by 1565. Gutenberg's press had been operating for over a century, and the Reformation it enabled by making scripture widely available was still actively reshaping European political reality. Governments across Europe were acutely aware of what happened when information technology escaped institutional control. The Borrowdale graphite did not look, at first glance, like a political threat. It looked like a black rock. But a black rock that could write on anything, that required no preparation, that cost almost nothing to use, that could be erased and reused. That black rock was the most democratizing writing technology since the printing press. And the government that controlled the world's only known deposit of it understood this before most people had held a peace. The mineral found at Borrowdale was initially called by a series of names that reflected the confusion about its nature: blacklead, plumbago, wad, because nobody in 1565 had any reliable framework for understanding what it was. It is not lead. It contains no lead whatsoever. It is graphite, a crystalline form of carbon whose molecular structure, in which sheets of carbon atoms are arranged in hexagonal lattices weakly bonded to each other, means that the layers slide off onto whatever surface the graphite is dragged across, leaving a precise, dark, consistent mark. The science that explains why graphite rights would not be developed for another 2 centuries, but the empirical observation that it wrote well, and that nothing else available in 1565 wrote anything like it, was immediately and widely understood. The Borrowdale deposit was pure graphite of a quality that has never been found anywhere else on Earth before or since. Solid, dense, requiring no processing beyond cutting into sticks of manageable size. It did not need to be mixed with anything. It did not need to be fired or refined. You cut it out of the ground and you wrote with it. This is important, because every other graphite deposit ever found anywhere on Earth is powdered or flaked, requiring binding agents and manufacturing processes to produce a usable writing instrument. The Borrowdale deposit was the only place on Earth where you could cut a piece of writing material directly out of the ground with a knife, which is why, when the British government placed it under armed guard, the guard actually meant something. There was no substitute. There was no other source. Control Borrowdale and you controlled the pencil. For approximately 80 years, they controlled it completely. The regime imposed on the Borrowdale graphite was extraordinary by any standard of industrial regulation in the 16th century. Mining was permitted only for a fixed number of weeks per year, to prevent exhaustion of what was correctly understood to be a finite and irreplaceable resource. The extracted graphite was transported under armed escort to London. Each stick was individually counted and registered. Possession of more than a small personal quantity of unregistered graphite was a criminal offense. And yet, the black market in Borrowdale graphite was, by the standards of 16th century criminal enterprise, spectacularly successful. Miners concealed pieces in their clothing, in the lining of coats, in the soles of boots, in spaces carved into the handles of tools. Local families developed hiding places in their homes that survived multiple official searches. The graphite was moved at night, through the fell paths that the inspectors did not patrol, to buyers in Kendal and Lancaster, and eventually London, who asked no questions about provenance. The government knew. The smuggling was too consistent, too organized, too widespread to be invisible. But the alternative, the full militarization of a remote valley in Cumberland against its own population, was more trouble than the traffic seemed worth. And so the graphite moved, illegally, consistently, into the hands of craftsmen, merchants, artists, and eventually manufacturers across England and the continent. The pencil, at this point, was not yet the pencil in the form you recognize. The Borrowdale graphite was cut into sticks and wrapped in string or sheepskin for handling. The casing that would eventually become the wooden sleeve was not yet standard. They were fragile, imprecise by modern standards, and expensive enough that they remained largely the province of artists and surveyors and the educated classes who could afford to acquire them through channels that didn't require explaining where the graphite had come from. But the principle, cheap, portable, erasable, requiring no preparation, was already doing exactly what the government had feared. It was spreading. The continental response to the Borrowdale monopoly produced the invention that would transform the pencil from a luxury item into a mass-market technology. In 1795, a French engineer named Nicolas Jacques Conté solved a problem that had been limiting pencil manufacture across Europe for 2 centuries. The problem was simple. Outside of Borrowdale, all available graphite was powdered. Powdered graphite could not be cut into sticks. It crumbled. It was useless as a writing instrument without a binder that would hold it together under the pressure of writing. Conté's solution was to mix powdered graphite with clay, press the mixture into rods, and fire those rods in a kiln. The heat fused the clay and graphite into a solid, stable writing core that was harder, more consistent, and more controllable than pure graphite, and whose hardness could be precisely calibrated by adjusting the ratio of clay to graphite. More clay, harder line, lighter mark. More graphite, softer line, darker mark. The pencil grades that exist today, from the 9H engineering pencil to the 9B artist's pencil, are the direct descendants of Conte's clay-to-graphite ratio discovery. He did not know he was creating a grading system. He was solving a wartime supply problem. France was blockaded by Britain during the Napoleonic Wars and could not access borrowdale graphite. He was making do with inferior materials. Making do produced a better product than the original. The borrowdale graphite, the purest, rarest, most coveted writing material on Earth for 80 years, was superseded by a mixture of clay and graphite powder that could be manufactured anywhere, in any quantity, without mines, without armed guards, without smugglers moving through fell paths at night. The monopoly had been protecting something that technology had made irrelevant. The pencil that Conte's process made possible, cheap, consistent, manufactured at industrial scale, available to anyone who could afford a few pennies, did something to the world of written communication that the British government had spent 80 years and considerable military resource trying to prevent. It put precise, erasable, portable writing into the hands of everyone. The consequences were not immediately dramatic. They accumulated, quietly, over the 19th century, in the way that technologies which lower the cost of a fundamental human activity always accumulate, invisibly, until you look back from a sufficient distance and see the world before and after as two entirely different places. Children who could not afford paper or ink could practice writing on any surface with a pencil stub. Carpenters, masons, and craftsmen who had marked their work with chalk or charcoal, imprecise, impermanent, difficult to control, switched to pencils that made finer marks, held longer, and required no preparation. Artists who had used silver point, chalk, and ink, each with its own elaborate preparation requirements, gained a tool of unprecedented immediacy. Henry David Thoreau, before he went to Walden Pond to write about simplicity, worked in his family's pencil factory in Concord, Massachusetts, developing techniques for improving the clay-graphite mixture that made Thoreau pencils among the most technically refined available in America in the 1840s. The man who wrote the definitive American text on self-sufficiency and withdrawal from commercial civilization spent his early career perfecting a mass-market writing instrument. That detail is not a footnote. It is the pencil in full. The Borrowdale deposit is essentially exhausted today. The mine that produced the only naturally occurring deposit of solid graphite on Earth was worked out over centuries and now produces nothing of commercial significance. The graphite in every pencil manufactured today is Conte's mixture, clay and powdered graphite, fired in a kiln, encased in wood, produced in factories that turn out billions of units per year, for a price so low that you have thrown away more pencils unfinished than you have ever used to the stub. The British government that placed armed guards around a hillside in Cumberland in 1565 was trying to contain something it understood, correctly, to be a technology of radical democratization, a tool that would put the power of precise written communication into hands that the established order had spent centuries ensuring would never hold it. They failed, not because their guards were incompetent, not because the smugglers were heroic, but because the technology that makes an idea powerful cannot ultimately be contained by controlling its source material. Conte found another way to make the graphite. He always was going to. The pencil you pick up without thinking, the one in the junk drawer, the one you chew the end of in meetings, the one your child loses within 48 hours of being given it, was once guarded by soldiers, smuggled through mountain passes at night, and considered dangerous enough by a government to criminalize its possession. It was dangerous. It still is. Every time someone picks one up and writes something down that they were not supposed to, it is doing exactly what the British government was afraid of in 1565. The graphite runs out. The idea does not.